So as I was wandering around, I will not name names, but I was asked, how many sermons are you going to preach on money, Pastor? And I replied, I'm going to keep doing it until you give enough. And then fortunately she laughed, so I was glad to see that she took that in the right way. It is that time of year, and we are looking at generosity. I'll begin with a prayer, and then we will move into our study and our sermon today. Let's pray. Holy God, thank you for this day, for your love, for your grace. God, thank you for these words that have been placed before us. Now may the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. So how much is enough? That's a question we don't seem to ask ourselves. Instead, we live with this mindset, this mentality of the one with the most toys wins, right? And I look around my life and I seem to be doing pretty well at trying to win. So I have to remind myself when I'm about to buy something, or before I acquire something, or before I get something new, I need to ask myself, how much is enough? It's a question that plays into what we talked about last week. And if you weren't here, or if you need a refresher, we talked about the scarcity cycle as it compares to the supply or cycle of abundance. Basically, we said that in scarcity, we ask, what can I afford? You remember we consume, and then we lack, and then we fear, and then when we get a little bit more, we consume again. It's this constant cycle, and sometimes we consume, and then we lack, and we grab our credit card to make up the difference, and then we get some more, and we consume again. It's like, if I can, I will buy it, even if I regret later when the money runs out. That's the scarcity cycle. I may not have a chance, so I get it now. But then the abundance cycle asks, what do I have? Because what we have, everything that we have, is a gift from God, and it's to be used and to be shared that others may know of God's love and grace. So this life of generosity, this cycle of abundance, begins with a generous life. If you remember from last week, we said that generosity is a mindset. It's a lifestyle. And giving, opposed to generosity, giving is an action that can be motivated by many things, including generosity, or guilt, or pressure, or pride. So this month, what I want us to look at is how it is that we become radically, passionately, intentionally, risk-taking, extravagantly generous people of God. That's what we're looking at over the next few weeks. And next week, we're calling this kind of Howard Payne Sunday, because in Common Ground, Alex will be preaching. He is a master's student at Howard Payne, and he's our current youth minister. And then Ryan McCord, who is a student at Howard Payne in the Biblical Studies department and is looking at becoming a United Methodist pastor, is out of the church, First Methodist Round Rock. She's going to be preaching here. And you can tell she's young and fresh and green and new, because when I told her we're preaching on generosity and kind of our stewardship campaign, she was excited. So that, you're supposed to be scared of those kind of sermons when you're starting out, but she's excited. She's looking forward to it. So I can't wait to hear the video. I will not be here Sunday, so I can't wait to hear the video of her and share with her in all that God's doing in her life. So you may ask, why do we keep talking about money, though? Well, of course, the finance team told me to, so that's one thing. But not really. They said that a couple of months ago, and we did, and everything got better. But really, the reason, if you look at the Bible, The Bible talks about money or possessions over 2,300 times. Now, I know we think of ourselves as New Testament now, so let's just throw the Old Testament out. We don't need that anyway. So let's just look at the New Testament. In fact, let's look at nothing but Jesus. A third of what Jesus said, a third of the parables Jesus taught were about possessions or money. So I think it's a pretty important topic. But why does God care so much about your money? Well, the truth is, He doesn't. He doesn't care about your money. He cares about your heart. Let me explain it this way. How many of you are parents, aunts, uncles, grandparents? Okay, yeah, I'm waiting for you to actually respond. Thank you. Most of us are parents, grandparents, or we've got siblings, and I want you to think back to that 16-month-old sibling or kid. I want you to think back to when they were 16 months old, and they're cute and they're sweet. They're just this little bundle of joy. And so mama decides to have a play date with another friend, and this other friend comes over, and they have their cute little beautiful baby, and they're playing together, and everything is so beautiful until one baby decides the other baby has a toy they want, and they try to take it. And what's the next word you hear? Mine. And they bonk the other baby on the head with the toy, right? And that's when every first-time parent realizes, oh my goodness, my child is a sociopath. I did not raise this child to be evil. I did not teach them to say mine. I did not teach them to hit. Everything I've done has been to teach them to be generous and loving and caring. And now here they are, spawn of the devil. We've got images of the Omen in our mind. We're racing ahead 20 years, and they've turned into Bundy or someone like that. But that's also where all of us who have multiple kids realize by the second kid, you know that all kids can be a selfish brat, right? It's just ingrained in us, it seems. I think deep down inside each of us, and this shows up very early in life, is the sin of selfishness. We want stuff. We want more stuff, we want our stuff, and we don't want to share. See, I think that God knows that money and stuff are the number one thing that competes for our heart, especially here in the United States, where it seems like we have an abundance of everything. God knows our selfish nature competes for our heart, and it's our heart. If our heart is selfish, then we can't be generous. If all we want to do is consume, and as long as our heart is focused on consuming and getting more, we can't be focused on giving. We can't be focused on generosity. And if our hands are always grabbing for more, they can't be open to be used by God to make new disciples and help others to know, love, and serve Him. So that's why we started with the scarcity cycle last week. Because this isn't an issue about money or our wallet or our portfolio or our checkbook. This is an issue about the heart and mind. So this week, I want us to look at it from another lens. I want us to look at this story that I think illustrates both the cycle of scarcity and the cycle of abundance. And these are two vastly different mindsets. When we think of this story that Dave read a portion of a few moments ago, there's some crucial points that I want to bring out. First thing is, this event in the life of Jesus is so profound, so pivotal, so earth-shaking for the early church that it is the only story of Jesus' life, other than the crucifixion, that is in all four Gospels. That is a pretty big statement when you think about how the four different Gospels were written to four different audiences from four different traditions of the Christian faith. And here, all four of them mention this one story. You can find it in Matthew 14, you can find it in Luke 9, or you can find it in John 6. With minor variations, it is the same story. Here's how the story goes. Jesus and the disciples have been traveling, and they've been preaching, and they are tired. So Jesus and the disciples are in Capernaum, a town of about 2,000, and there's thousands of people have come to town, and they're gathered around, and they decide they're going to get away. So they get on the boat, and those of you that are going to the Holy Land will see how Capernaum's situated right next to the coast. They get on the boat, they push off, and they begin going down. We call it the Sea of Galilee. It was really just a big lake. And so they're going down the shore, and what they can't see because of the trees and the foliage is the people are following them. And I mean, this isn't like, I jump in my deck boat with a 305 on it, and I crank it up and I run down the lake. I mean, these guys are either fighting the wind or rowing or in some way trying to traverse the water as a group, and it's a slow go, but it's a lot easier than walking. So they go down shore about 2 miles. Once again, to a place that those of you that have been to the Holy Land or are going on this trip, it's about 2 miles down, and it's called Tapga. That's the name of the community, Tapga. And Jesus comes ashore. The disciples are pulling the boat up, and as he gets off the boat, he sees the crowd already coming. And I love this phrase. Jesus had compassion on them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. He's tired, he's worn out, but he looks on the people with love, and he offers them what he has. So Jesus starts teaching them, and for hours he's teaching them. Now here's the thing about this. The Bible says there were 5,000 there. But you have to remember in biblical days, they counted the men. They didn't count the women and children. Don't ask me why. We're not getting into that debate. Just know that they counted the men. So this is closer to like 5,000 families. 15 to 20,000 people have gathered. It's as though the entire community of Brownwood has gathered around. And I want to try to paint a picture for you so you see kind of an idea of what this is. So I want you to think, if you go up here to Austin Avenue, go out toward the cutoff road, the pasture there to the left. There's a pond, there's the hill in the background. It's the corner of the locker place. Now imagine that pasture, that hillside, except the pond, the tank that's there, in your mind, make it a huge lake. And the entire city of Brownwood has gathered on that hillside. And Jesus is standing at the bottom with the lake to his back, preaching up the hill to the entire city of Brownwood. That's the closest I can paint a picture for you if you've never been to Tapga. So with that in your mind, Jesus is speaking and he's teaching for hours, and it's getting late, but no one is leaving to get anything to eat. So the disciples come to him and say, Jesus, this is an amazing sermon. I mean, point 18 was amazing. You got to that one 4 hours ago, and it was the best one of all of them, and it's life-shaking, but these people are getting hungry, and we need to kind of send them away so they can go find something to eat, right? Well, when you realize how remote a location this is, and the closest town's 2 miles away, and it's Capernaum. It's a town of about 2,000. There's no Bimbo Bakery in Capernaum. Mrs. Baird's hasn't been born yet, so there's no one that's going to be able to provide enough bread for 20,000 people. in a moment's notice. So to send them away wasn't really helpful. So Jesus says, well, why don't you go feed them? Give them something to eat. But what's the focus of the disciples? See, they're focused on what they don't have. They say, what are we supposed to do? Spend 6 months to a year's wages to buy bread for all these people? We don't have that kind of money. Basically saying we can't afford to do that. We don't have enough. But Jesus has something totally different. Jesus' focus is totally different than theirs. Verse 38, it says, how many loaves do you have? Go and see. Scarcity asks, what can I afford? Abundance asks, what do I have? And Jesus finds out about the 5 loaves and the 2 fish. And if you read this in the version that as John tells it, you realize it's a little boy's sack lunch. You know, he had 2 fish, which these are, they're called Galilean bass. And it would have been the kind that you might have caught with a net up by the shore around the reeds. They were about this big, you know. They were like sardines, really. What they would do is they would pickle them. And then they would take the barley loaf, which is a small loaf of bread. I mean, this isn't, you know, your French loaf. This is just a small little loaf of bread. And you would take that sardinish pickled Galilean sea bass, and you'd scrape it off like kind of like a relish onto the bread, and you would eat the bread and the fish together. So when you think of 5 loaves, I mean, this isn't 5 French loaves, you know, big old loaves of bread and, you know, 2, 70-pound Appaloosa catfish or anything. This is just a tiny little sack lunch that this kid offers up. And this is where I want us to begin to notice the experience of God's abundance. The first thing I want you to see is that God multiplies what is blessed. What happens first in verse 41? It says, Jesus, taking the 5 loaves and 2 fish, the tiny little sack lunch, he looks up to heaven, he blessed and broke the bread, gave them to the disciples, and set it before the people. And he divided the 2 fish among them all. That's the first thing we see. Jesus takes what he has and he blesses it. He doesn't go looking for more. He doesn't wish for more. You know, he doesn't do like the Black Baptist pastor. I was at a church and I was supposed to preach, and they had passed the offering plate, and then he's up getting ready for me to step up and preach, and someone comes up and whispers to him, and he stops everything and says, we didn't get enough. We need more to pay the light bill, so they pass the offering basket again. You know, Jesus doesn't do that. He doesn't look at the little sack lunch and says, this isn't enough. Let's pass the basket again and get some more. He blesses what he has, and God multiplies it. He looks at his provision. He blesses it, asks God to bless the provision for what purpose? To be given away. Then point number 2, God multiplies what is given away. We have to jump over to Matthew 14, verse 19. We'll read that passage. It says, then he ordered the crowds to sit down on the grass. Taking the 5 loaves and 2 fish, he looked up to heaven, blessed and broke the loaves, gave them to the disciples, and the disciples gave them to the crowds. So Jesus broke the bread and put it in baskets for the disciples. But then as the disciples gave it away is when the miracle happened. As it was being given away, it began to multiply. Unexplainably, exponentially. It multiplied. When we stop focusing on what we lack and we start seeing what we have, and we start seeing that what we have can bless others, and we start giving it away, that's when the miracles start happening. And I'm not talking about feeding 20,000 kind of miracles. We actually see those kind of miracles pretty often Drive by Good Samaritan or St. John's whenever they're giving out food. Or be a part of our backpack program whenever we're feeding kids on Friday so they have food for the weekend. That's a miracle where you look at what you have and you give it away. But I'm talking about more tangible things that change the lives of those around us. Like the empty nest couple I heard about, John and Amy. They heard that a single mother of 4 was sleeping on the floor. She had a couple of beds, and she had put the 4 kids in those 2 beds. But she'd created a pallet on the floor because she couldn't afford another bed. So she was willing to sleep on the floor so that her children could sleep comfortably. And John and Amy couldn't stand that. And Amy laid there awake at night thinking about the bedroom next to the master bedroom, the guest bedroom that no one had slept in since she could last remember. It had a bed, a full bedroom suite. The next morning, she told John what they were doing, and they loaded that bedroom suite up. And as they were loading it, they realized, well, there's a dining room table and 6 chairs in the garage in the corner, stacked up. No one's using them. They're covered in dust. So they just loaded those up too. And they took them to this single mother. And she had tears rolling down her face as they unloaded the bed and the table and the chairs and the dresser and the nightstand and the mattress and the box springs and the bedspread and the sheets. And they made the bed for her and they left. Later that night, Amy got a call from that mom. With tears in her eyes and her voice cracking, she thanked Amy for the gift. And as great as the bed was going to be to sleep in, it was the fact that they had a table where all 5 of them were able to sit at the table and eat together, something they had not done in years. And she said, Amy, I can't wait to be able to do for someone else what you've done for me. Did you hear the scarcity? I want to give more, but I can't. I think every one of us can understand where she's coming from. But Amy said, oh, you don't have to wait. Just look around at what you have that can bless others. And it was in that moment that she realized her next door neighbor in the apartment complex was a new mother with an infant. And she didn't have a rocking chair. But the single mom's kids were all older now, and she didn't need her rocking chair. So she carried it next door, knocked on the door, and the miracle continued. That's the beginning of the generosity cycle. That's the beginning of giving away what you have so that it can be a blessing to someone else. I got so much more to say, and we're out of time. So I'm simply going to ask, how are you going to be generous? Whether it's a storage building full of stuff that you never use, your income, whatever it is, how is God calling you to be generous? Yes, we're working toward a tithe. That's the goal for all of us. But in the process, how is God calling you to be generous?